Apache woman sneaks into Cowboy's bed to warm up, and what he saw made his heart stop. The wind moved like a whisper through the trees that circled the edge of the land, cold and quiet, brushing frost across the worn wooden fence that stretched along the prairie. The cabin sat still in the pale morning light, its chimney barely breathing smoke, as if the fire inside had given up trying to fight the cold. Snow hadn't fallen, but the ground crunched underfoot with frozen dust, and the horses in the pen stood motionless, their breath rising in slow, tired clouds. The hills beyond were sleeping giants, grey and silent under the winter sky. Not a sound came from the world except the low creak of the front door when it moved slightly in the wind, a sound that always reminded him that he was the only one left. Cole hadn't spoken to another soul in 5 days. Since the blizzard passed through, not even the post rider came by. He had mended the saddle straps, fixed the broken hinge on the barn door, and counted the canned beans twice just to feel the weight of doing something. At night, he drank from the chipped mug and sat by the fire, staring into its heart like it might give him answers. But it never did. The warmth faded too quickly, and the silence of the cabin always grew heavier once the flames went out. He had come here after too many wounds, not all on his skin, and he told himself he liked the quiet, though it sometimes pressed on his chest like a stone. That morning, before the sun had finished rising, he woke with a shiver. The fire had burned low in the hearth, and his breath curled in the air above him. He reached for the blanket, still half asleep, and that's when he felt it. Not the rough wool under his fingers, but something warm, flesh. He froze, heart knocking against his ribs, and turned his head slowly toward the other side of the bed. In the grey light, he saw a figure curled beneath the covers, small and still, black hair tangled across the pillow, bare shoulders, scraped arms, a body that had slipped in during the night, without a sound. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stared, every muscle tight. The air in the room suddenly felt colder, the silence louder. He could hear the soft rasp of her breathing. Whoever she was, she had come in freezing, and found her way under the blankets like she was running from death itself. She didn't stir, not even when he slowly pulled himself upright. That's when he saw the bruises, faint but visible, painted like shadows across her back, and the tiny cuts along her wrist. Something in him shifted then, not panic, not fear, but a weight. Something he hadn't felt in years. She hadn't come to steal. She hadn't come for shelter. She had come to survive. She didn't wake even as the light grew stronger and the fire crackled low in the corner. Her breathing stayed shallow, slow, as if her body was still halfway frozen from whatever she'd escaped. Cole sat on the edge of the bed, not moving, afraid to startle her. There was something fragile about her stillness, not just the kind that came from cold, but from exhaustion. Like the kind he had seen once in a dying horse that refused to rise, even when the wolves circled. Her hands were curled near her face, raw at the knuckles, and her lips were chapped like someone who hadn't tasted water in days. She wore a torn buckskin dress, soaked in patches with melted snow, clinging to her body like it had once fit, but hadn't been made for her. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, not fully sure why. Maybe it was shame, or memory, or the way her ribs showed when she shifted. She was just a girl, no older than 20, maybe less. He wondered if she had been running through the night while he slept warm under covers, unaware, of the life slipping past his cabin walls like a whisper in the dark. His hand trembled slightly when he set the cup of water by the table beside her. He hadn't trembled in years, not after the war, not after the fire that took his wife, not after burying his son under a cottonwood tree that never bloomed again. But this girl, her silence, her bruises, the way she had curled into the warmth like a dying bird, it made something ache in him that he had buried too deep to name. He paced the floor for a long while, boots brushing the wooden planks, each step louder than it needed to be. He should wake her and ask who she was. He should tell her to leave, maybe ride her down to the nearest town and hand her over to the sheriff. That would be the right thing, wouldn't it? He had no business keeping a strange girl under his roof, no matter how broken she looked. He didn't know her. He didn't want trouble. But he didn't move to open the door. He sat back down and looked at her again, not just at her wounds, but at the way she held herself even in sleep, like someone who had learned that kindness had a price. He remembered a time long ago, when his wife had hidden behind the barn, bruises on her arm from her father's drunken hand. She hadn't asked for help either. She had just looked at him with eyes that said everything. He hadn't walked away then, and he wouldn't now. As the wind scratched against the window panes and the fire moaned in the hearth, Cole reached for the old coat hanging by the door. It still smelled like smoke and dust and winter. He draped it over her gently, careful not to touch her skin, careful not to wake her. She stirred just once, then went still again. He sat nearby, watching, waiting, guarding, not because he owed her anything, but because something in him had finally cracked. He couldn't walk away, not this time. The girl woke just before noon. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and wary like a deer who smells smoke in the woods. She sat up too fast, shoulders pulled tight, chest rising and falling. The blanket slipped down her arms, and she scrambled backward on the bed, knocking over the tin cup on the side table. Her eyes darted to the door, then to Cole, then to the unlatched window. He didn't move, didn't speak. "You're safe," he said gently, his voice low like talking to a wild horse, not wanting to spook it. "You came in cold. I let you sleep. That's all." She stared at him a long moment, hands fisted in the blanket, mouth dry. Then her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. She swallowed them down like someone used to choking on pain. Cole saw the bruise on her jaw now, clearer in the daylight. He saw the thin cut across her collarbone, the kind made by wire or rope. And for a moment, he hated whoever had done this with a heat he hadn't felt in years. Her name came slowly. "Tala," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I just needed warmth." That one word told him everything. She didn't speak much after that, but over the next day, in bits and broken pieces, the truth began to slip through. She had been traded, passed from hand to hand like cattle. After a raid near Red Mesa, she and 2 other women had been taken by a small group of white men running guns through native lands. Her sisters had not survived the journey. Tala had escaped near the river barefoot, with no map and no hope. Just cold wind and the memory of fire behind her. Cole listened without interrupting. He didn't ask for details. She didn't offer them. But on the second morning, just as he was hauling water from the well, he noticed something that turned his blood to ice. A single horseshoe print, fresh, not his, not from his land. It hadn't snowed since the girl arrived. Someone had been near the edge of the property watching. By evening, he spotted smoke on the far ridge. A campfire, too close to be casual. He knew then that someone was tracking her. Someone who wanted her back, not to save her, but to silence her. And like they didn't let property go. They wouldn't be looking for her with kindness in mind, and if they found her here, they wouldn't just take her. They'd burn the cabin, bury the evidence, and erase the story. Cole sat by the fire that night, watching her stir beans in the old pot. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and he saw the faint burn marks near her wrists, as if she had been branded. She caught him looking and pulled her sleeves down in silence. He said nothing, but the next morning he oiled the rifle. He checked the bullets in the drawer, and he walked the perimeter twice. Trouble was coming, and this time it wasn't going to knock first. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Tala did not ask questions, and Cole did not force conversation. They moved through the cabin like 2 ghosts sharing the same walls, each carrying their own silence. Yet in small ways, they began to notice each other. She swept the floor with careful hands while he chopped wood outside. He left hot bread on the table each morning before heading to the barn. She sewed a torn patch on his coat one evening when he left it by the fire. Nothing was spoken, but something between them softened. One morning, after noticing her staring at the rifle he kept leaning by the door, he brought out an old revolver instead. He placed it in her hand without saying much. Just a nod. They walked to the edge of the field, the ground frozen hard beneath their boots. He showed her how to grip it steady, how to breathe before squeezing. She fired 3 shots, all wide. On the 4th, she hit the empty tin can. She didn't smile, but her fingers relaxed around the handle. Later that same day, while feeding the horses, Cole noticed her lingering near the bay mare. She reached out slowly, letting the animal sniff her palm. The horse nuzzled close. Tala rested her head on its neck, eyes closed for a long, still moment. Cole turned away to give her that silence. She hadn't wept in front of him, but he knew that moment was something close. That night the wind howled. Snow threatened from the horizon. They sat by the fire after supper, not across the room as they had the first nights, but just feet apart. He was cleaning his boots. She was mending a loose stitch on her moccasin. No words passed, but the fire's crackle felt like company. After a long while, she spoke without looking up. "My mother used to sing near the river. I don't remember the words, just the sound." Cole looked at the flames. "My boy used to fall asleep by the fire, holding my finger like it'd keep the dark away. He didn't wake up one winter." Neither said more. The next morning, she placed a carved piece of bone on the table, a small horse, no bigger than a matchbox. She'd found the carving knife in a drawer and shaped it from memory. Cole picked it up, turned it over in his hand, then slid it into his coat pocket. No thanks. No explanation. Just a nod. That evening, as snow finally began to fall, Tala added more wood to the fire without being asked. Cole stood near the window, watching the distant ridge where the smoke had once been. Nothing there now but white and wind. The room glowed soft orange. Outside was danger. Inside, for now, was warmth. She sat on the floor near the fire, wrapped in his old coat. He sat in the chair, boots resting near hers. 2 souls not healed, not whole, but stitched together by shared quiet. He watched her fall asleep again, this time not curled in fear, but resting like someone who had found a moment's peace. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the night. It felt like the hour before war, the kind that makes you wish time would stop, the kind that makes you wonder if peace, however small, could be enough. They came just before dusk. 3 riders, slow and deliberate, shadows stretching long behind them as the sun sank low over the plains. Cole spotted them from the edge of the barn roof, where he had gone to tighten the chimney flap. Hay didn't wave, didn't call out, just approached with the silence of men who had come to take something they believed was already theirs. Tala stood at the stove inside, stirring the pot, unaware. When Cole stepped back through the door, his jaw tight and rifle slung low, she looked up and saw it in his eyes. "They're here," he said quietly. She froze. Her hand dropped the ladle. She didn't ask how many. She already knew what it meant. Her breath quickened, but she didn't cry. She just nodded and stepped back from the window. By the time the knock came, hard and heavy like a threat, Cole had already positioned himself between the door and Tala. She stood behind the kitchen table, gripping the knife she'd used to slice bread earlier. Her hands trembled, but her chin didn't drop. Cole opened the door slowly, just wide enough to face them. The man in front was tall, red-bearded, with a long coat dusted from the trail. His belt sagged with bullets. The other 2 flanked him, lean and wolfish. All 3 wore the same grin, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. "We're looking for something that wandered off," the leader said, his voice like gravel. "A girl, Apache, small, quick, dangerous in the wrong hands." Cole didn't blink. "Ain't seen anyone." One of the others leaned forward in the saddle. "Funny. We tracked her here. Snow's fresh. Her prints lead to your porch." "She could have gone past," Cole said, voice calm, grip tightening behind the door. "Tracks blow all kinds of ways in the wind." The leader chuckled. "Well now, you wouldn't be hiding government property, would you? She's worth a pretty sum. Bounty men like us don't forget faces, especially ones with red cloth tied at the wrist." Cole didn't have to look. He remembered the scrap of cloth Tala had used to bandage her wrist, the only thing she had left from her sister. It was still there, peeking from under her sleeve. "We'll take a look inside," the man said, stepping forward. Cole lifted the rifle, cocked it once. The sound cracked louder than thunder in the cold air. "No, you won't." Everything stopped. Even the horses shifted uneasily. The man's smile vanished. "This ain't your fight, old man," one of them hissed. "She's nothing, used up and thrown away. You want to die for that?" Cole's voice came low and clear. "She's not nothing. Not anymore." The standoff hung in the air like a rope pulled tight. Seconds stretched thin as glass. Then one rider reached for his gun. A shot rang out, not from Cole, but from inside. Tala had picked up his second rifle. The bullet tore through the wooden porch post, grazing the rider's shoulder. He screamed and dropped from the saddle. Chaos erupted. Cole fired once, striking the ground near the leader's boot. "Next one goes through your head," he warned. The men backed off slowly, dragging the injured one toward their horses, faces twisted, hands twitching with fury. But something in Cole's eyes told them he meant every word. "This ain't over," the leader spat. Cole didn't respond. He stood tall, rifle raised, breath steady, body still. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, the silence returned, thick, cold, shaking with what almost happened. Cole turned slowly. Tala was standing in the doorway, her hands still wrapped around the barrel, her face pale but unflinching. They had both pulled the trigger today, and neither would be the same again. The night after the standoff was colder than any before. A quiet cold, not just in the wind, but in the air between them. Cole didn't speak. Tala didn't ask what came next. The cabin was lit only by the fire, now burning low and stubborn. She sat beside it with her knees pulled up, the old coat draped over her shoulders, her rifle resting across her lap. Outside, the snow fell soft and slow, like ashes from an unseen fire. Cole watched it from the window, the barrel of his rifle across the sill, eyes never blinking. Every now and then, he'd scan the ridge, searching for movement. That never came. The riders were gone, for now. But something inside him stayed coiled tight, waiting for the return that might never happen. Just before dawn, the horses stirred. Cole was at Amal, the door in a second. But it was only wind. Only darkness shifting. The men were gone. The danger had passed, but the weight remained. He stepped outside without a word and walked to the edge of the property. Snow covered the tracks now, like the land wanted to forget the blood that had almost been spilled. In his chest, something heavy unclenched. Not relief, not victory, just the slow exhale of surviving again. He stared at the trees until the sky began to turn faintly blue. Inside, Tala remained by the fire, her eyes hollow but wide awake. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her body still sat like a fortress, guarding what little peace she'd earned. The rifle stayed close, the fear stayed closer. Cole came in with snow on his boots and the weight of the night still on his shoulders. He didn't speak. He poured water into the kettle, set it on the fire, sat across from her, elbows on his knees. Tala looked at him, her face lit by the flickering flame. There was no gratitude in her eyes, no joy, just understanding. The kind of look shared between two people who had both been hunted and had both chosen not to run this time. They ate quietly that morning, bread and beans, steam curling above their bowls. She reached for more firewood without asking. He let her take the chair closest to the heat. They moved like two halves of something scarred but joined, not by choice, but by need. Later that day, Cole saddled one of the horses and rode to the ridge where the campfire had been. All that remained was blackened snow and a bullet casing half buried in the ice. He stood there a long time, the wind pressing against his coat, then turned and rode home. When he returned, Tala was sweeping the porch, slow and steady. She didn't look up until he stopped beside her and set the bone carving, the little horse she'd made, back on the windowsill, where she had once left it. It had fallen during the fight. He had found it in the snow, cleaned it off, and brought it back. She didn't say anything, just nodded once. He did the same. The war had passed, but the silence that followed it was deeper than gunfire. They didn't ride away. They didn't bury anyone. But something had been laid to rest, not in the ground, but between them. In that silence, something unspoken had been chosen, to stay, to guard, to share the fire, even if only for another night. Spring came late that year. The snow took its time melting, clinging to the hills like it didn't want to let go. But it did, eventually. The ice receded, the wind warmed, and the land began to breathe again. Grass peeked through where frost once ruled. Birds returned to the trees around the cabin, chirping soft songs in the morning. The world moved forward. Slowly, but it moved. Cole repaired the barn roof with steadier hands. He walked farther each day, patrolling less, trusting more. Tala began planting things. A narrow strip of onions along the side fence, herbs near the window box. She spoke little, but her steps no longer sounded like someone waiting to run. She still flinched at sudden sounds, still woke some nights with wide eyes. But there was softness now too. Not peace, not yet. But something that looked like the beginning of it. They never talked about the men who came. Cole never mentioned the scar across her shoulder, and she never asked why he kept a child's toy, a little wooden horse, in his coat pocket. They knew better than to pick at wounds that were learning how to close. One day, she painted the door red. It startled him at first, the boldness, the color against all that gray. But she smiled slightly as she brushed on the last coat, and for the first time he saw something brave in her. Not survival, belonging. That summer, a traveler passed through, a preacher looking for rest. He stayed one night and asked them how long they'd been married. Neither answered. Tala just looked at Cole and gave a small, tired nod. He said nothing, but didn't correct the man.